I'll start with a salutation, and then we will go into the subject. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Surai Satchid Sukha Swarupaya Swami Netapaharini. Revered Swamiji, revered Mataji, and dear friends who have gathered through this amazing, occasionally pesky technology. Today, this morning, the subject is knowledge and devotion. And for a change, Mataji decided to make it more interesting, and she proposed that we switch. Swami Atmarupananda is equally comfortable across the board, but I'm a little bit more one-sided. And if those who have been following talks from the Vedanta Society, you know that it's sort of leaning towards the side of jnana. So Mataji suggested, why don't you take up Bhakti this time, brother? And I said, good, we'll do that. I've been traveling in the Himalayas recently, and I've just come back yesterday. And that also means that I am quite jet lagged, so don't take what I say seriously. In the Himalayas, we have the most interesting ashram, Mayavati Advaita Ashram, where revered Swami Atmarupanji has spent quite a bit of time when he was in India. That was established by Swami Vivekananda with a rather very unique kind of attitude and unique kind of project, where he wanted an exclusive center and a set of rules and procedures which would enable the practice of philosophical inquiry, jnana, into who we are and what this world is, leading to eventual realization, enlightenment. But I said that is exclusive and that is peculiar because that is certainly not mainstream. And the mainstream in Hinduism, across India, across the world, in all religions, the mainstream is devotion, is faith and devotion and surrender, what we call the path of bhakti. So that's what I'll talk about. Even in the traditional non-dualistic ashrams and the non-dualistic practitioners in the Himalayas, you will always find some component of bhakti. I remember this monk who seemed a radical non-dualist. About 20 years ago, I was in the Himalayas, and I got talking to this monk. We got quite friendly. He used to say, sort of self-deprecatingly, in Hindi, he would say, "Arey Mahatma ji, hum to adha nastik hain." Oh, Mahatma, I am half an atheist. I'm almost halfway to atheism. But even him, one day, I went to his cottage where he used to live on the bank of the Gauri Kunda. I went in, he didn't respond to my knocking, so the door was open. I pushed it open, I went in, very tiny little room, and I saw him sitting in meditation and evidently silently repeating a mantra. So I quickly left the room and I asked some other monk. That Swami seemed to be a radical non-dualist. But today I went in and suddenly I found that he is, repeating a mantra, which is usually a very, very devotional practice. So what's the deal here? And that other Swami, who was a Punjabi monk, he's grinned and he said, "Wo to chupa Rustam hai." He's a hidden master, let's say, put it this way, that he has a hidden side to him, a devotional side to him. It seems to be he is knowledge on the surface and devotion within. This is what Swami Vivekananda had said. Spiritual masters are not easy to fathom. He said that Sri Ramakrishna, the old man, he would call him the old man. Sri Ramakrishna was all devotion on the outside, but inside he was all knowledge. And I, meaning himself, Vivekananda, I am knowledge on the outside, but inside I'm all devotion. He would say that my heart is as soft as a woman's heart inside. So there are these two sides, and I think to some extent, we all have these sides, uh, sometimes unknown to ourselves, unknown to ourselves. Carl Jung said that everybody has this male and feminine side to themselves. So bhakti, there are different paradigms of spiritual life. And for example, let's take three paradigms: the knowledge paradigm, the yogic or mystical paradigm, and the bhakti or devotional paradigm of love. The In the knowledge paradigm, the idea is that we are that ultimate reality, Brahman, and we do not know what we are. This ignorance is the problem, and whenever ignorance is the problem, knowledge is obviously the solution. So ignorance of our real nature is the problem. Knowledge of our real nature is the solution, and the whole practice becomes how to generate this knowledge of our real nature. So hence you have the study of texts and listening to teachings about non-dualism, then reasoning it out, getting an understanding of it, deepening it until it becomes a living fact for you. Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, that becomes the practice. Whereas in the yogic approach, the yogic approach is I must have a direct experience of God. I think in some sense, Swami Vivekananda was a greater yogi than even he was a jnani, a yogi, and a bhakta, and a karmi, a man of action, a sage of action, a sage of knowledge, and a great mystic, and a great lover of God. But he was par excellence a meditator from his childhood onwards. And notice how Vivekananda becomes Vivekananda. This young man goes to Sri Ramakrishna and asks, have you seen God? Can there be a direct experience? Like we are having a direct experience of the world, and we are having a direct experience of ourselves. Can we have a direct experience of God like that? Have you had this experience? And Sri Ramakrishna says, yes, I have. And I have seen God, and I see God more clearly than I see you. Which means not only a direct experience of God is possible, it is the most powerful experience of our lives. And these are mystical experiences. They have a history, an ancient history, going all the way back to the beginnings of human history and beyond that into prehistory. So, mystical path. The problem in this path is our minds are not pure enough, our minds are not calm enough, our minds are not inward enough. By a process of purifying, calming, and inwardizing our minds, we come to realize the truth which is already there. Notice the difference between this and the knowledge approach. Here, it's not so much studying and reasoning and trying to understand. Here, it's more like quietening the mind down and trying to see what underlies or what is beyond the mind, what is irradiating the mind by its own radiance. And we discover our own real nature, that we are the Atman, the Purusha. Vivekananda says the mind is like a lake, and you purify. The water is pure, and if the water is still, you can see straight through to the bottom of the lake. Mind is pure, mind is still. If you can make it pure and still, you should be able to see the reality which is beyond the mind. That's the claim of religion. The immortal soul, God, whatever you call it, transcends the mind. So it's there, and we should be able to see it. There is another path, the path which concerns us today, the path of devotion, love of God. Here, the idea is not so much reading, and of course, there is enormous amounts of bhakti literature, devotional literature, but it's not so much about reading the scriptures, certainly not so much about arguing, logic and philosophizing, nor even so much about controlling the mind and the senses. No, no, no. Here, we take the help of a much greater power than our mind, of a much greater power than ourselves as individuals. There is this greater power, the power which generates this entire universe, the power which runs this universe, the power which can ultimately dissolve this universe and go on to create other universes, the power which knows us through and through every bit of us. This tremendous supreme power is there in this universe, which in theistic religions, religions which worship God, It's been called God or Father in heaven or Narayana, Shiva, Devi, the Divine Mother, or Allah, in various names. This ancient seekers have come across this tremendous fact of spiritual life, the fact called God. Now, Bhakti uniquely takes the help of God. So devotion, the path of devotion, is the path which holds on to God and tries to attain liberation and tries to attain spiritual realization. Why? Why are we engaged in all of this? The goal is, in Vedanta, it's the same in all the paths. We seek a solution to the human condition. That in this life there is unhappiness, there is misery, suffering. It's limited, it's bound by birth at one end and by inevitable death at the other end. In between also, if it was all a party in between, I would still take it maybe, but it's not a party in between. It's quite miserable. It's quite full of great amounts of struggle and sorrow. I sometimes say, in a pessimistic tone, there are only two possibilities in this worldly life. Either you are dissatisfied or you're frustrated. We want things in this world, and if you get it, the guarantee is you're going to be dissatisfied. And if you do not get it, the guarantee is you're going to be frustrated. So these are the only two possibilities, very bleak possibilities. So so-called pleasure that we get, the so-called happiness that we get, the Buddha pointed out even that is suffering because we don't see it. It's a superficial coating on underlying suffering. Um, Notice how evanescent pleasure is. Notice how temporary, how difficult it is to get, even more difficult to maintain, and then it leaves its traces behind. It leaves its poison in our system so that we want it more and more varieties. And nothing is quite enough. And very soon, as we become mature, all of that becomes empty and dissatisfying. This elderly lady, a devotee, she had come here and she was telling me that, before taking up spiritual life seriously, I was thinking, my life is sort of done. I'm old now. Why am I alive? I'll be alive for a few more years, and it'll mostly be difficult and unpleasant as the body deteriorates and goes towards inevitable death. Why go through all of that? I think a lot of sensitive people think that way, and they are right. That's why Camus' stunning beginning to his book, the only serious, I think it's the outsider or the rebel, I think. Um, the only serious question that we have in life, that we should have in life, is why should I not kill myself right now? Why should I not commit suicide? That's the only serious philosophical question one should have. And the only answer to that is spirituality in its broadest sense. Yes, in a jnana way, in a mystical way, in a devotional way. There is an answer to this. Is overcoming suffering possible? Yes, a very emphatic yes. All the religions of the world, all the mystical spiritual traditions of the world throughout history answer in the affirmative with a thunderous voice. Yes, it is possible. Thousands have done it before us. And we too must walk on this, whether you decide to walk on it, everybody here has decided, but whether we decide to walk on it or not, one day or the other we'll be driven back to this. You see, 10 years in life, 20 years later, or in the next life, or in the life after that, you'll still have to come back to this point that we take up spiritual life seriously. It is possible to overcome suffering. Is it possible to attain real deep happiness? Yes, yes, yes. Especially in this path, the path of bhakti, the path of devotion. If you want to be happy, do you want to be happy instantly, right away? We say yes. Do you want to be happy limitlessly? We say yes. And do you want to be happy, sustainably throughout, always? We say yes, yes. Is it possible? It is more than possible. It's possible right now, right here. And the answer is in bhakti. In bhakti, it is said that if you want to be happy right now, if you want to be happy limitlessly, endlessly, sustainably, then just fall in love with God. fall in love with God. Bhakti is falling in love. It often seems to be a practice, but to be genuinely bhakti, you have to fall in love. Just like falling in love in human love, similarly, you fall in love very, very similarly, actually. You fall in love with God. Make a slightest effort and you fall in love with God. To the extent that we succeed, we get immediate burst of happiness. And when we hold on to that, we get continued. See, every other path, it takes time and effort. The results of bhakti are continuous all the time. When you have the fire of love burning in our hearts, we get happiness, the radiance and the warmth immediately, just like human love. So yes, in order to overcome suffering, in order to attain happiness and bliss, we take up the practice of bhakti. But that's also the promise of the path of knowledge. That's also the promise of the path of meditation. But there's something unique about bhakti. The unique thing is about bhakti is it is said, God prefers bhakti. It's wonderful. If you are philosophizing, investigating into who am I, God is happy. Best wishes to you. If you're meditating and controlling the breath and sitting straight, good. Best wishes to you. God, your blessings of God are on us. But when you love God, when we love God, God loves us back. God enjoys it. The devotee approaching God through love, God is said to enjoy that. Sri Ramakrishna gave the example of cows. You have to imagine a village setting in Bengal, farmers, and fields and cows. And he noticed that cows, you feed them hay, but if you put a little bit of an oil cake in it, mix it up with that, the cows munch it up happily. They really enjoy eating the hay. And he says, similarly, you mix up your spiritual practices with devotion. God loves it. We love it, and God loves it. So it is beloved to God. The path of devotion is specially beloved to God. Another point, qualifications. If you see the path of knowledge, all the texts almost all the texts begin with what are called fourfold qualifications. If you would make the path of knowledge something more than an interesting philosophy, something more than speculation, then you need these fourfold qualifications. In Sanskrit, sadhan chatushtay sampanna pramata adhikari. Adhikari means the one qualified. Pramata means the seeker or the knower. Which knower is qualified? Which seeker is qualified for the path of knowledge? The one who has these four qualifications. Viveka, the ability to discern or discriminate between the eternal and the non-eternal, that there is some ultimate eternal reality and the world is transient. Vairagya, even more difficult. Therefore, I want that eternal reality. And I turn decisively away from the world, from the non-eternal. If I've made up my mind that something is eternal, something is non-eternal, something is ultimately real and valuable, the rest is not, then I have to make good on my words, on my understanding, and I have to really take action. I have to decisively turn away from the world. This is called vairagya, renunciation, dispassion, renunciation. Vivekananda says in at least a couple of places that this renunciation is the turning point in all the yogas. This is where spirituality, something becomes spiritual. Your meditation becomes spiritual when it's attended with this renunciation. Your philosophical studies become spiritual when it is attended with this renunciation. Bhakti also, love becomes spiritual when it's attended with this renunciation. What does it mean? It means this. Vivekananda says this renunciation is the turning point in the yogas. The karma yogi, he gives up every he attempts to give up every selfish motive and work selflessly. This is the renunciation of the karma yogi. The bhakti yogi, who gives up all worldly desires for the sake of one almighty love of God. It's the same power. It is transmuted into love of God. That's the renunciation of the devotee. This is where it becomes devotion. And the Raja Yogi, the meditator, says no to experiences of the world. Eyes want to see, ears want to hear, says no, and turns inwards. But the renunciation of the Jnani Yogi, Vivekananda says, is the hardest of all. He must say no to all of this, renounce all of this experience all at once from the very beginning, and go, attend to the transcendent, the pure existence, consciousness, bliss. So difficult. Vairagya. Then the sixfold disciplines. I'm not going to go into the details. And an intense desire to be free, mokshutvam. Now, when we hear this list, it sounds forbidding. We will say that, well, I'm not qualified then. I'm not qualified. I don't have that kind of viveka, that kind of dispassion for the whole world, that kind of discipline which of mind and body and turning inwards, and that intense yearning for enlightenment. I may have a little bit of a yearning for enlightenment, but not too much. So that's the problem in Jnana Yoga. Whereas in Bhakti Yoga, when we enter into devotional practices, what is the entry fee? What is the cutoff? What are the SAT scores you need to get into the Bhakti school? The answer is nothing. The gates are wide open. Just walk in. Just walk in. But didn't you just say you need dispassion, you need to give up all other desires and want only God? Yes, inevitably and later on, but not right now. Even if you feel that I'm not quite there yet, still you walk through these doors. If you say you still have desires in the world, our tendencies, it means that there are desires in the world. Bhakti says, Jnana says, stop that, turn away from them, focus into Jnana, otherwise it won't work. Bhakti says, doesn't matter. To the list of whatever you want, your entire Amazon cart, shopping cart, in Amazon, you have a shopping cart. Add one more item to it. Add God. If you have a whole list of things you love and want in the world, add God to it. It could be at the bottom of your list, but just add God. And when we add God, what happens is that God has a way of spreading all over our lives. There is an old metaphor or a parable about this called the Bhikshu Pada Prasarana Nyaya. The wandering monk stretches out his legs. What this means is there are wandering monks in India even now. So one of them turns up at your house. He's a vagabond, but a holy vagabond. And he turns up at your house, and obviously you offer him food and shelter. You give him maybe the barn to stay in. He just takes a corner and says, I'm fine here. And the next day you find the other corner has been taken. He has a little Krishna, an image of Krishna, which he puts in the other corner. He says, of course, Krishna needs a special corner. The best part of that hall, the room, Krishna has to stay there and to clean it. And next day in the morning, you find before you are up, he is up and plucking the best flowers in your garden and the best fruits in your garden, not for himself, but for Krishna. And of course, you can't eat before Krishna has been offered food. And then there is the worship of Krishna, which everybody in the family is required to attend. You might say, this is a pest. Yes, but a holy pest. And this is the reason why so many rituals and rules are put, not because God requires them. These are disciplines which swallow up our time and energy. People complain about it. I've seen in India now, especially nowadays, many families had their family deities, but people are busy now. And the children are, it's a modern society, so children don't stay at home, they go elsewhere. And I've seen elderly people coming and saying that, but we can't serve the family deity anymore. And so the recommendation is you either give the deity to a neighboring temple, or give it to the Ganges, put it down in let it float down the Ganges or whatever. But their complaint is it takes so much time and energy. So it requires a constant attendance, and that was the purpose. That was the purpose. Our energies flow out into the world in 101 nonsensical ways. So they are gathered in, and so you make flower garlands for the deity, you prepare food for the deity, and you cannot take food before the food has been offered to the deity. It becomes a member of your family. And it becomes the most important member of your family. And you treat it that way. What happens is over time, it's a method, it's a process. You develop a sense of the presence of God, a living presence in your family, in your life. And it happens, it's something that's transmitted down to children also. Children who grow up in that family, they take to it much more easily because they grow up with that. So this is called Bhikshu Pada Prasarana Nyaya. This is the holy wanderer stretching out his legs. He sort of covers the rest of your life, and it's a great, great blessing. Maybe he goes away, but he leaves the deity in your house, and for generations, that becomes the center of your family. It's a beautiful, very beautiful thing. It's going out of fashion, unfortunately, but that's the idea. Let us let God a small devotional practice in our life. It could be nothing more than offering a couple of flowers and waving a little incense before a small little shrine which you have. Do it mechanically, even if you're not so inclined. Thing is, when we say, I am not inclined that way, we mean the intellect is not inclined that way. We are so much in our heads that we are not in our hearts, we are not in our bodies. Our heart might benefit from it. Our emotions might benefit from it. See, a little footnote here. Often the problem in the path of knowledge is when we enter into the path of knowledge without sufficient qualifications, and who is sufficiently qualified? The requirements are so high. Then what happens is our intellect races far ahead of the rest of our being. Our intellect races far ahead of our heart. So we do, after some time, inevitably come to some understanding of non-duality, but our emotions haven't kept up. So the problems in the life of a jnani, of a person on the path of knowledge, are generally problems, not so much problems, logical problems or philosophical problems. The problems are emotional problems, unresolved emotional complexes. So one sadhu said, Rota wa jnani kisko pasand hai? Who likes a grumbling, weeping, whining, enlightened person? Jnani, person of knowledge, and yet has grudges, yet has gripes and complaints and grumbles about some things in his life. Once you are spiritually advanced, once you are spiritual, once you are enlightened, certainly, you lose the right to complain. That's it, it's done. You can't complain about anything. Yeah. So if I still have hassles with people and myself and my environment, that's because of this disconnect between my intellect and the rest of my being. Plato, I think it was, who said, to know what is good is to be good. To know what is good is to be good. Either Socrates or Plato. I think it was Plato. And when we hear that, we immediately rebel and say, that's not true. In fact, we know what is good, but we can't be good. That's the whole problem of our lives, our moral life and our spiritual life. The whole problem is there. We know a lot, but we can't be it. And we can't be it because yoga psychology and bhakti psychology and jnana psychology, they all tell us the problem lies with the mind. Without sufficient cultivation of the mind, knowledge of the good does not translate so easily into being good. As the poet said, between the intention and the act falls the shadow. Between the intention and the act falls the shadow. The shadow is our own shadow. We cast a shadow. If the mind were purified, if everything was straight in one line, my thinking, my feelings, and my actions, my speech, all in one line, to know the good would be to be good. That's a characteristic of what we would call an enlightened person, a Jivan Mukta. We see in the lives of great saints, if they had any problem, any kind of defect, you point it out to them, and just like that, they set it right. If they want to set it right, they set it right immediately. I remember in the days when people would smoke a lot. Thank God those days are past. Uh, I remember one of my friends back in college was saying that I gave up smoking, and another friend said, that's easy. I've given it up many times. So that's what happens to us. I've given it up many times. We keep failing. So this purification of mind, it's a hard, difficult task, but it happens easily and sweetly in bhakti. Why? This is a great, one of the greatest advantages of bhakti. Bhakti operates at the level of the prana, at the level of the heart. And so it's First of all, it takes command of our emotions, our desires. See, our desires are of the nature of I want. And bhakti, love, is also of the desire of I want. It just replaces the I want the world with I want God. Just the object of desire is replaced. I want the world in 100 different ways. My desires flow out into the world. That is collected into one desire for God. And that's bhakti. When we do that, from the very beginning, a great change occurs in our mind and heart. And the mind is automatically purified. That's why in all the traditional teachers of the path of knowledge whom I've come across in the Himalayas and elsewhere, and in the texts of Shankara and post-Shankarites, there is always an emphasis on cultivating a devotional practice. It starts with invocations, devotional invocations to God and Guru, and there is an emphasis on creating a devotional practice for yourself because it's a powerful aid to knowledge. It purifies and sweeps clear the debris in our emotional space, And so the path to knowledge, to understanding, and the practice of jnana becomes much easier. There are, especially these days, it's fashionable to have direct path and new Advaita. You are awareness, you are Brahman, and that's it. It's all done. But it's not done, unfortunately. Would to God that it would be so easy. It's not done. It's not the problem of the path. They are right. We are Brahman. But the problem is we have so many unresolved issues accumulated in this lifetime and from many past lifetimes. We cannot easily ignore that. So devotional practices, very powerful, very useful, and it's perfectly in keeping with non-dual tradition. However, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about later on, is not bhakti as a support for jnana. I have mentioned this earlier in my talks on jnana, that bhakti is useful for jnana. The reverse is not true, just by the way. There are traditional paths of devotion, Vaishnava bhakti. They will never recommend that you have a component of Advaita in your practice. No. In fact, sometimes they will warn you against it. They'll warn you against it. The path, devotional practices, usually very helpful for Advaita practitioners. But the knowledge aspect of it, the Advaitic inquiry aspect of it, may not be helpful to the person on the path of pure love. In fact, sometimes it may be damaging. So ultimately, it's all one. Ultimately, it takes you there. Ultimately, there's no fear. But at the beginning, if one is walking on the path of pure devotion, often one is told not to associate with the people on the path of knowledge, not to read those books, because it can shake up the simple faith of a seeker. So what we're going to do today, in the remaining talk today and tomorrow, is the path of pure love. Love, which will take us directly to God, the path of pure bhakti. A couple of quick points before I, how am I doing for time? I think we're almost done, right?
Swami, I think your time is up, but the time is yours. This is time for questions now, but the time is yours. You do as you like.
Just a couple of points, and then very beautiful points. So I want to bring them out here. A monk told me in in the Himalayas. He was an absolute non-dualist monk, Punjabi Vedantin. I used to study the Ashtavakra Gita under him. But one day he said about his younger days as a young monk in the Himalayas, he would be quite an energetic person, running around from cave to cottage, going to the elderly monks and finding out if somebody needed a blanket, somebody needed medicine, somebody needed a little more nutritious food. And his guru scolded him. The Swami's name was Lakshman Das Ji. He has passed away. His guru scolded him, saying, "Arey Lakshman Das, kuch bhajan bhi kar liya karo. Oh Lakshman Das, do some spiritual practice." Bhajan means spiritual practices. Literally, it means devotional singing, but spiritual practices. Kuch bhajan bhi kar liya karo. Do some spiritual practices. And then this monk said, I felt a little depressed. So what I'm doing is, am I wasting my time? I'm trying to help these elderly monks. And then in grammar class, we studied the etymological roots of bhajan and bhakti, And it says, bhaj sevayam. One of the meanings of the etymological Sanskrit meanings of the term bhajan, which means spiritual practice or even devotional singing, one of the roots is to serve. Sevayam, it is used in the sense of serve. So bhakti, love, translates into service. You do something for the deity. You have a deity at home or in your heart. Do something for the deity. It could be, cooking something and offering it devotionally, arranging flowers, or seeing the deity in other beings and worshipping the deity by taking care of other people. So devotion is service also. There's a direct link between loving and doing. Finally, this is something that I heard. This is from the Naradiya Bhakti Sutra. It says, Siddho bhavati, amrito bhavati, tripto bhavati. What happens by devotion? One becomes perfected, one becomes fully satisfied, one attains immortality. So that's the result of bhakti. But I found it put very beautifully by a monk, which I still remember. He said, Bin sadhan ke siddhi, bin gyan ke amritatva, bin bhog ke tripti. What it means is, siddhi means perfection, and sadhan means practices for perfection. So it could be meditation, it could be worship, it could be study, whatever. It could be japa. These are called sadhan, practices. And from that you will attain siddhi, perfection. But the monk pointed out, and Narada Bhakti Sutra says, this is the glory of bhakti. Without all that, without the study of all those scriptures, without maybe without other spiritual practices, don't get me wrong, you will do spiritual practices, but just by the love of God and in your heart, you attain perfection. Bin sadhan ke siddhi. Without the whole paraphernalia of assorted religious practices, spiritual practices, you attain fulfillment. How? By loving God. Of course, the fine print is, to attain that kind of love of God, one might have to go through a lot of spiritual practices. But love of God leads to perfection. Second, Amritattva. We are Brahman. Advaita Vedanta will say, you realize you're Brahman, you will attain immortality. It says here, you don't have to go through all that. You love God, God will give you the knowledge necessary to attain immortality. Sri Ramakrishna would say, my mother, Mother Kali, Ma Kali, has shown me what is there in the Veda Vedanta. I just love my mother and she shows me whatever is necessary. Then, bin bhog ke tripti. Bhoga means enjoyment. You eat and you drink and you make merry and watch movies and go out with friends. All for what? For this word tripti, fulfillment, satisfaction, in a very worldly sense. But for that, you need enjoyment. You need to enjoy stuff to be fulfilled. And here it says, without enjoying worldly stuff, you're completely fulfilled. By what? By love, by devotion. If love is in my heart, there's a deep, lasting, ever-growing fulfillment in my heart. That love leads to immortality. That love leads to perfection. So, in Hindi, he put it so beautifully. Bin sadhan ke siddhi, bin gyan ke amritatva, or bin bhog ke tripti. All right, I'm done. If you have a couple of minutes, maybe we can take a couple of questions.
Swami, in your life, have you seen how a bhakta can also be a jnani, and also how a jnani is also a bhakta? Have you seen those examples?
Yes, I would never say that a bhakta is an ajnani. Maybe in initial stages, there might be no preference for the path of jnana, but for those who are developed on the path of devotion, who have genuine love for God in their hearts, would one say someone like Mirabai is an ajnani? Would one say someone like Kabir or Tulsidas is an ajnani? Of course not. They have the fullest range of non-dualistic knowledge. They may not express it all the time, but it comes out in their devotional writings. They know it. And if you would go and talk about the Upanishads and Advaita to them, they would understand every bit of it as we understand better than us. Actually, they would understand it. But their path is the path of devotion. That's at the higher end. That's at the end of those who are enlightened or close to enlightenment, on the path of devotion, and yet they display a full comprehension of the path of knowledge. They understand it very well. But also, and this is at more closer to our end, I have seen my friends, younger monks, maybe, person who had no particular inclination for the path of knowledge, for the path of Advaitic inquiry. They had a simple devotion to Sri Ramakrishna, to the Ma Sharada. They are solid, silent workers doing the work of the monastic organization of the Sangha, and they have passed years. Over the decades, I've seen many such young monks or monks of my age or younger, whom, without much cultivation of the path of knowledge, if I were to talk about it, they get it just like that, without the logical intricacies involved. But the point is immediately taken up like that. And I've seen any number of philosophers, any number of public intellectuals who have difficulty with these concepts, the concepts of Advaita Vedanta, because it's not just a question of the intellect. Somewhere the heart is so rooted in the world, it refuses to acknowledge the truth of non-duality. On the other hand, for these young monks or for the devotees who have genuinely loved God and spent years in that way, for them, they're already spiritual. And so when they hear these non-dual truths, for them it seems, yes, obvious. They say yes.
Swami, how can we increase our faith if it doesn't come naturally to us?
Yeah, that's where spiritual practice comes in. I said without practice one attains siddhi, but the fact is there is apara bhakti and para bhakti. So apara bhakti, the relative devotion, where you have a regular course of repeating the name of God, for which we have a whole session tomorrow. I'll talk about that then. For worship in as many ways, there are hundreds of different ways of worship and prayer. So a regular course of worship, prayer, devotional practices, repetition of the names of God, mantra japa, and a meditation if possible, this will lead to the development of genuine bhakti, prema bhakti, para bhakti, that will come. Yes.
So, I mean, what if one does not have a genuine, natural affinity for bhakti? How is it possible? But you find jnana much more intriguing and satisfying.
In that case, go on the path of jnana. Remember, however, if you look at the traditional teachers of jnana in Advaita Vedanta, they all had a devotional practice of their own. Shankara certainly did, and they all strongly recommend a devotional practice which you should have to supplement your jnana. In that case, it's your primary path will be jnana, but strongly recommended to have, even if bhakti doesn't come naturally to you, at least let it be mechanical, let it be a little part, like add God to your list. So just add God and see the magic.
Tell me, if we're interested in pursuing bhakti but don't yet have a guru, how do we proceed? How do we choose a chosen
guru.
ideal?
Get in touch with Mataji. She'll tell you how to go about it. If you want a guru in our lineage, we are not the pushy kind. So if you find a guru in any bhakti lineage, that's wonderful. Or if you want it in the Ramakrishna Vivekananda lineage, there are very easy procedures for finding a guru, getting initiated, and making a beginning on the path of devotion. I think I see some hands.
Swami, how can I sustain enthusiasm in the practice of yoga when things get tough?
Their bhakti has a special advantage. The reason being, I can see two reasons. One is bhakti is inherently pleasing, even when things get tough. We always like to hang around with people we like. We like to eat foods which are our favorites. Whatever gives us pleasure, well, for better or worse, we are pleasure seekers. Human beings have a pleasure instinct. And mostly it's a problem on the spiritual path. But on the bhakti path, it's not really a problem. You're supposed to, make a swivel, a pivot. You take that same pleasure-seeking instinct and pour it towards God instead of trying to stop it or transcend it. So in tough times, we turn to bhakti for some joy in our lives. And bhakti has another special advantage. All the other paths are mostly private. It's up to you. It's your personal project. You try meditation, you try philosophical inquiry, it's your personal project. But bhakti, you belong to a much greater power, much, the greatest power in the universe. You have surrendered to, you belong to them, belong to the Lord now. You belong to Sri Ramakrishna, you belong to Ma Sharada, you belong to, Shiva, the Divine Mother, Jesus. So you belong to them. And so in tough times, especially, we need help. And it's only on the path of bhakti that you are not thrown to your own resources. Rather, you throw yourself to the resources of the Almighty. One sadhu used to say, a great jnani used to say about the path of bhakti, bahut badi sahara hai. There's a great, great support, tremendous support in tough times. I mean, there's no match at all between trying to go it alone and on the path of bhakti.
Swami, here's a question about spiritual jealousy. How do we prevent ourselves from getting stuck in that? We see others progressing and we feel we ourselves are not in our path of devotion.
It's a good thing. There's a concept called holy envy, where you are envious of a truly holy person. I remember feeling once in front of Swami Bhuteshanandaji, who was the 12th president of our order, the strangest of feelings. We'd always go with a feeling of reverence and happiness to him. It was a delight to be in his presence. So here was this 98-year-old monk, the president of the entire order. I was just a novice. And suddenly one day in front of him, I got this feeling of jealousy. Jealousy means envy. What do you have, I felt, that makes you so? I wish I could have some of that. So yes, in that sense, if we are jealous, we are not bothered about the person who is so-called going ahead of us. There's no going ahead of us really in spiritual life. It's a kind of silliness of the mind. Yes, I would want some of that. Oh, that person is serene. I wish I could be serene. That person is so diligent in their early morning meditations. I wish I could be so diligent. That person is such a silent, hard worker for years and decades in his life. I want to imbibe that. If we focus on that, some of those qualities will definitely come into us.
Swami, first, this is the last question for someone who has never walked on the path of bhakti. For example, an agnostic, how does one start?
Or just add God to your practice. I mean, I'm not saying that you should start. It's recommended. Give it a go. A deity which you feel inclined to. If you don't feel inclined to anything at all, something that is in your tradition. Are you a Christian? Are you a Muslim? That often we don't give enough credence to the power of tradition. Something that's been in your family. You might surprise yourself. And if you don't at all find anything which your mind hooks onto, take the help of a senior spiritual teacher who will recommend something for you. And start. Look, it's not so difficult. You have a pet dog. Within hours, you get endlessly attached to the puppy, and it becomes your lifelong companion. You have a favorite. Anything that we possess. It could be your favorite pen, or even an old stereo phone, or whatever it is. Any gadget, any place, we human beings tend to get attached. So you spend enough time with it, you will get attached. And something like God, if you get attached to that, it's the greatest blessing one could ever have.
Thank you